Saskia Kort Chick, es Directora de ESG Research en AllianceBernstein. Saskia, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
What we want to talk about is modern slavery. What is modern slavery in our times?
Modern slavery is a crime driven by greed. Around 50 million people around the world are a victim of practices like forced labor, wage theft, deceptive recruitment practices, and forced marriage. It's not just an emerging market issue, and it happens around the globe.
Why are you as investors focused on modern slavery?
There's a couple of reasons for that. So on the one hand, we see an increase in legislation around this topic. Legislation for investee companies to report, legislation for companies to act on their supply chain and to do due diligence, and legislation that can ban products from entering certain markets. That has a material impact on a company from a reputational point of view and from a legal point of view. If you combine that with an increased interest in social issues that we see in both in the media as well as in society, we think that this can really be a material issue for a company. As investors, it's not only the right thing to do to investigate how companies are managing both these risks as well as the opportunities, it can really help us as investors to drive long-term return for our clients.
How are you integrating it in your investment process?
So we have developed a three-step process that is really aligned with our approach as fundamental research manager. The first step of the process is to understand how risk exposed a company is to modern slavery risk, both its own operations and its supply chain. And there's a couple of factors that we take into consideration. For example, what type of business model does the company have? Does it fluctuate a lot that creates a lot of pressure on the supply chain? Is it located in emerging markets where there might be a high risk of migrant workers who are a victim of modern slavery? What type of products does it source and where does it source the company from? All of this helps to understand the risk exposure, and that is risk exposure to people, not financial risk, not reputational risk, no, risk to people. What we do in step 2 of our investment process is to understand how investee companies are managing these risks. Recognizing that certain sectors are really exposed to this, we want to know how a company is dealing with this. So what we've done is we've developed a best practice framework that helps us assess what a company is doing and what the areas of improvement are and what its strengths and its weaknesses are. Once we've understand that, we integrate it into our financial outlook. So that is the third step of our process.
What are high risk industries?
So there's a couple of high risk sectors and industries, and often it's driven by a larger labor force really focusing on manual labor, whereby it's more easily to treat people as a commodity. So one individual can more easily be replaced by another individual. So you can start thinking about sectors in the agricultural industry, in construction, also in metals and mining, particularly if you're thinking more about the emerging markets. But most people would be familiar with the apparel industry if you start thinking about things like the sweatshops. But it's not just the sweatshops that put clothes together, but also the cotton and the raw materials that go into it. The construction industry. So there's a whole range of industries that may be exposed. And I think it's important to understand that you then need to identify how companies on an individual level are managing these risks. Just because you're a company in the apparel industry doesn't necessarily mean that you're really poor at managing these practices. And that's really what our investment process is focusing on.
Important question about investors. Can investors have an influence on companies?
Yes, I certainly think investors can have an influence on companies. And I think the financial sector plays a key role to detect and disrupt modern slavery. As investors, we can leverage our voice through our engagement process with companies, but we also have a role as shareholder whereby we can vote on our proxies. Not only is this the right thing to do for the victims of modern slavery, but we also think that there's a material financial benefit for our end clients. If we understand modern slavery better, what the risk and the opportunities are, we have a more holistic view of our investee companies, and that helps us take better investment decisions. And leveraging our influence through our engagements, we can drive positive change at investee companies. That leads to better practices, and that can help a company be more sustainable, which can lead to better financial returns.
Thank you very much, Saskia Kort Chick, Director ESG Research en AllianceBernstein. Buen día y buen negocio.
Thank you for having me.
Good day, good business. 9:32 de la mañana, con la mirada puesta en lo que está diciendo ahora mismo Lindner, el ministro